Hi, Julie Usher, Recipes for a Sweet Life. Today we're doing how to cast sugar. If you saw an earlier video, I decorated these elaborate cast sugar containers. And in this video, I'm going to show you actually how to make the cast sugar pieces that go into them. Cast sugar you might be most familiar with. You may not have heard of it, but I'm sure you've seen it. It's basically the structure that goes into making of those panorama Easter eggs. You know, those ones that have a little opening in them and you can see a picture inside. Well, the outside shape of the shell of the egg is actually made with cast sugar. And cast sugar is a really easy way to decorate because it's nothing more than sugar and water. I use it for the eggs, of course. I use it to make fancy containers. I also use it as little separators sometimes in wedding cakes. It can make really elegant sculptural pieces. The only downside of it is quite heavy, so in a cake type construction you want to make sure that it's properly supported from underneath. Now let's talk about how you mold it. Cast sugar is basically molded sugar, and there are some containers that will work well for molding and others that won't. Basically, any container that has a wider opening than the bottom will work fine because you're going to be packing this with sugar and it needs to be able to fall out freely. So a container like this would not work because I'd pack sugar into the top and it wouldn't be able to, the wider areas wouldn't be able to get past that narrower opening. So always make sure the opening is wider than anything else that sits below it. Glass also works super well. In fact, I love to pack in glass because you can see through it and see if there are any openings or cavities in the sugar as you're packing. It's a little harder to visualize with metal. And you can make them in any size. You can hollow them out to make little containers. You can leave them solid if you're not going to be putting anything inside. You can color them. You can leave it plain white. And I'm going to show you how to do all of the above. First of all, in terms of choosing what pieces to use, usually I will start my process, and people often ask me about this. I will start my process by sketching out what it is I think I'm going to make. And so I sketched a bunch of sugar containers early on. Then I got out my molds and I said, well, what would look kind of cool together? I use this piece or something similar on the bottom, this to form the hollowed out inside, this for the lid, and then I cast sugar to create that little topper piece. The recipe for cast sugar can be scaled up or down in any quantity that you want or need, but it's basically 1 cup of sugar to 1 tablespoon of water is the right blend. And just fill up the containers I need to fill and see how much sugar they take. So this one is going to take about ½ a cup. Now, when the sugar gets wet, which it needs to be to cast it, it will compress. So typically I will measure out how much sugar I need and I'll add about 30%, 25 to 30% more sugar so to take into account the compression factor. So that's a little bit about how to determine how much sugar you need so as there's not a lot left over. Okay, but I've got 3 cups in here. So to get the perfect ratio, 1 cup water to 1 tablespoon of water, I need to add 3 tablespoons of this because I've got 3 cups of sugar in there. Now let's talk about how to get color. If I were just to add 3 tablespoons of clear water to this, this would be white. But if I want to do like a light pink like this, I need to tint my water first. And for this I use my liquid gel food colorings that I normally use for working with royal icing. They dissolve in water, so that's great. It needs to be water soluble. I've got 8 tablespoons of water in here, and I know that if I just put 1 drop of color in there, I know this creates a pretty pale pink water, just from trial and error. And then when I cast it, it's going to come out to be even paler, like this kind of pale pink. If I want a darker color, then I simply add more food coloring to the water. Typically about 1 drop for every 4 tablespoons of water leads to more of a medium shade, like a medium pink. But I've got 1 drop per 8 tablespoons, so it's going to be pretty light. After a while, you'll get a sense of this. And let me just stick that on a little white cardboard here so you can see what shade of water I'm starting with. It's a pale pink. I don't have all my food coloring quite dissolved. A little whisk would be helpful there. And if you decided you wanted to adjust color along the way, it's dangerous to add food coloring directly to the sugar because it'll just clump and clot in there. The reason I dissolve it in the water first is to get an even distribution of color. So I only need 3 tablespoons of this, and it goes. That's 2. I'm going to work it in stages, and I use clean hands. You can also put gloves on and just work it around. And what I'm trying to do is get the sugar just damp. You don't want it like really soggy and wet because then it will stick in the molds. It just needs to be damp so it compresses, holds its shape, and then pops out of the molds. So I'm working it through until the color is uniform and is uniformly moist. I'm short 1 tablespoon of water, so it's still kind of crumbly. And it's really pale pink. I think I want a darker color, so what I'm going to do, I mean, it would darken up a little bit with my last tablespoon of water, but I'm going to just show you the effect of adding 2 drops of water to that blend and see if we can intensify that color any. It's a little pinker. You can see it just in terms of how it goes down on the sugar, how pink that is. But it'll lighten up as I disperse it here. So that's my last tablespoon of water for this blend. And you can see now that it's holding together and holding its shape when I clump it. And that's what you're looking for. But this isn't ready yet because I've got some really dark spots of pink and some really light spots of pink. So I want to work it until it's a uniform color. This can take a few minutes. If you don't mix the color all the way through, you might end up with a dark spot in one area and a light spot somewhere else. So this mixing process is pretty important. We're ready to pack the mold. You want to pack it while it's still damp. If you leave this exposed to air, it's going to dry almost immediately and become difficult to pack. So you want to work with it right away. If you're starting out, start with a clear container. It's easy to see through and get a sense of how tight you have to pack it so as not to have voids. Make sure it's dry and clean with no sugar from a previous molding experiment in there because it'll be harder to get the sugar out. So always clean and dry to start. And I pack as I go. And as you can see, it's easy to press out voids when it's clear. You want to take it all the way to the top so that the sugar doesn't have to fall to get out of the container because that can cause it to crack and break. And then you want to level the top. Just use the side of an offset spatula. And then to invert, you can line this with parchment paper if you want as an extra safeguard, but these are cake rounds and so it will slide off of these pretty easily later. Top it with the cardboard, invert it directly on it as opposed to dropping the container onto the cardboard because again, you don't want the sugar to have to fall or it can crack. And then gently lift it off. And there you have it. I had maybe a little bit of moisture here. My sugar stuck there, so it's a little uneven there, but we're going to cut a window into this one. As I mentioned, the panorama eggs, they have windows in those, and this is where the magic of the window comes into play. You have to plan for that ahead while the sugar is still wet. Score where you want the window, and for that I use cookie cutters. I'm just going to score a little round here, which will create a little round window in the back side of this container once it's dry. You want to go in about 1/4 of an inch, but just be wary that if you press too hard, you can crack the outer sides of the sugar, and you don't want to do that. I think that's about as far as I can go. Let's see. Yeah, maybe that was 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. Now, set that aside for about 3 hours, and we'll be ready to scoop it out and pop out the window. So now I'm going to show you how to work with a smaller tin mold. Once you get the hang of something in a clear mold and you know how hard to press, it's easy enough to extend that into a tin mold. You just always want to level when you're done because that's hard to do once the sugar dries. And you want to clean up any edges that look a little rough. I took a little too much off there, so I'm patting a little more in. Cleaning up these edges. And then just lift up. And then you've got a nice little cast sugar piece. This would be perfect for a base, say, of a vase. I've got some that I cut windows into. We'll try to pop out when we unmold them. Others that I didn't. And they've been sitting 3 hours. So they're dry on the outside, but hopefully I can still break through, carve out the little interior. This would be, say, the body of a container. You could score. You could try to mark a line with your pastry cutter and maybe score with your trussing needle to kind of give you a sense of where you want to begin digging. But normally I don't do that. Normally I just take my melon baller and gently scoop out. You can see there's just a crust. The sugar's just dry on the surface. But it's very soft. It's almost the consistency, molding consistency, within 1/8 of an inch of the layer. Now, the longer this dried, I'd have a little more crust to get through, so I don't want to wait too long. You have to be a little bit careful, though, about not digging out too close to the sides because you don't want to break through the side of the container. But I find the melon baller does a nice job of just creating a nice round shape just by using the edge of it. And generally I won't carve this out. I like my walls to be at least 1/4 inch thick. This one tapers towards the bottom, so I have to be careful. I can't dig out straight down. I have to taper it on the inside as well. Okay, but that's fairly well dug out. I've got at least 1/2 inch to almost 1 inch dug out here. I clean up any rough edges because they will dry in place. I would then sit that overnight. Upside down is fine, or right side up, until it's completely dry and ready for stacking, and it will eventually become solid all the way through. Now let's try carving out that one with a window and see if we can pop that window out without breaking it. I have to carve closer to the edge to make sure I make contact with that scored mark that I made earlier. And I'm going to have to dig pretty deep on this one. I could feel the window drop out into my palm. There you see the effect of scoring. I've got a nice, I don't have a clean window all the way through because I have to clean out all that sugar. But this is basically how you would make a window, say in a big panorama egg. This is just a different shape. So there's the window nicely carved out. If you want to see how to decorate these larger cast sugar pieces and to create beautiful little urns and vases like those that you see up here, please refer to my next video. Till then, live sweetly.